See if that works. There you go. How are you doing with this?
It is a blessed morning. I am so grateful to see your shiny face. Look at this.
Yours as
We are
well.
bright. We are alive.
Oh, so
right.
good. Yep. All right. So, all right, folks. I'm Trace Nelson, and I've been doing. Y'all know me. And I am so overjoyed to be talking to you all today with Jocelyn Jackson of the extraordinary People's Kitchen Collective out of Oakland. I have been a crazy admirer of the work you guys have been doing, the lore and the sort of spirit that you all have kind of created with your collective. It's sort of, I don't know, just it's like the Pied Piper. Everybody who sort of comes in contact with you guys or gets to experience what you do tells the story of it. I think it sort of infuses the way other people kind of move back in their own spaces. So I knew about you in the world, but recently we got connected by Davita Davison because of a really dope piece she working on. Absolutely, absolutely. And our conversation was so good; it just was in my mind, and then weirdly and fortuitously, Clay said, "Hey, why don't y'all get on?" So it just conspired beautifully. But I'm really thankful to have you here, and grateful for you taking time out to have this conversation.
Thank you so much. It is an equal honor to be with you. You are incredible treasure to the Black community and to the Black food community. I am so grateful that we get our paths get to cross in this way.
That's right. That's right. So I feel like these conversations have really been amazing because they give folks an opportunity to really tell their stories. And it's folks that maybe we haven't. I think this moment too has kind of not forced us, but given us the opportunity to slow down a little bit and really sort of hear people's stories from their own voices and sort of ask those dope questions that you never really get to ask because folks are so busy typically. So I don't know. I feel like we sort of have gotten a lot of thought around what you guys' collective is about, but I really am fascinated by your personal story because you all are like the X-Men. You all bring so many disparate, so many sort of dope, sort of influences and like points of your backgrounds that make the collective work and make the eyes that you put onto the focus of each of your projects really broad. And so I'm wondering about like sort of your origin stories, all those things that make up your practice.
Yeah, and it really is that. The origin story is so key to the way that we show up in our lives. And it is a combination of many things because it's family, it's geography, it is culture, it is spirit, it is relationships. And really what I found in my process is that, I'm 45 years old and my path got me to this location, to this particular expression, only in the 2000s. I started out as I should say I started out as an artist in undergrad and then immediately went to law school because there was really a yearning for me to pair creativity and justice together. And while I was in law school, I had to do that thing that you've mentioned to me before, which is a lot of unlearning. A lot of unlearning. I had to learn a lie to pass a test and then unlearn it in order to be in the world as a Black woman. And so it was just an extraordinary experience of learning what the system was and knowing very specifically that I wanted to tear it all down. And so it was creativity. It was just
that part.
It was this opportunity to really be in the world and take my heritage trip home with Peace Corps to Mali, West Africa, and lived there for 2 years. I want everyone to have that experience because it was heart opening. It really told me one of the biggest lessons of my life, which is we have to be able to simultaneously hold joy and sorrow at the same time, because that's what our lives require of us. And it was powerful. And I am grateful that that took me to environmental education as my next sort of professional degree. I did a Master's of Science in Environmental Education through an experiential program. So I was traveling all over the Pacific Northwest, the Eastern Seaboard, the big island of Hawaii, and finally in southern India, learning and just being humble to the process that our ecological worth is so bound up in accepting that we are part of nature. And that really informed my attention to food and to this idea that being of service to one another includes having that whole picture of who we are. And grateful that after that, I ended up on the West Coast and in the Bay Area and found the community that taught me that this art and this justice and this ecological, awareness that I was really trying to come into, the through line was food. The through line was I need to be able to really take a look at the historical context and legacy of food in relationship to these areas, because it is a true place of social change within our society. It creates an opening for people to receive a message that often isn't possible in other spaces. And so I'm grateful, so grateful that, you know, part of my learning was about the Black Panther Party and about their people's programs, the people's survival programs, including the free breakfast program, seeing how food is a gateway to self-determination and to liberation, and that all of that is required with an intersectional lens. Because if we're not all getting free, it's not happening. We can't pick and choose. And we hold a table with People's Kitchen Collective, a table that is centering the lived experience of Black and Brown folks very specifically, because we want to honor that experience as the root of all of our collective liberation. And with Justice Kitchen, it's become clear just in the last couple of years, I made that very specific choice that this is a project that is serving Black women and femmes specifically. I am and
so good,
able to provide even a little bit of a healed experience that is tied to the huge rupture in our lives from the continent of Africa, reclaiming that relationship, as well as honoring so much that came from the South and those traditions, and really providing a space for there to be a sacred relationship with the ancestors that got us here. And I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful for that I get to do this work in this way, knowing that it requires a multidisciplinary approach, and the multitude that we all contain to really bring it into the world.
It's so much to unpack there, and it's sort of is one of the main reasons I wanted to have this conversation, because I feel like there's something you said about the environmental studies work that is interesting to me, because I think I'm talking to a lot to young people who are wanting to come to this industry for lots of reasons, but see the sort of the more tangible, rooted spaces that they want to occupy, and thinking about what they should be doing educationally. And it's almost this sort of like egg kind of thing, because I find a lot of the environmental studies or the food studies programs that exist aren't necessarily built for this resistance work, this revolutionary work, this intersectional work. And so I'm wondering about your thoughts on, because you could talk a little bit about the program you went through, because that experimental part of it is probably very different than a lot of programs, so that, you know, the way in which they engage, but also the necessity of having more Black and brown spaces and whole spaces to sort of affect and sort of, I don't know, sort of change the posture that those programs sort of teach through, because it feels so much like you have to sort of influence or sort of prove the validity of the ways in which you're going to apply this sort of generic, you sort of like, so I don't know, just you talk a little bit about that, because it feels so much like you taking the educational tools from all the different disciplines and sort of use them as like parts of your toolbox, and not necessarily in the ways in which they were intended.
It's so true. And that insight that you give to that, and interrogating that piece feels so important, because every institution every learning institution that I've been a part of, you know, formal institution, even the one that was more alternative in its structure, they all centered whiteness. And it's so important to go into an experience knowing that, so that your heart doesn't get broken, right? It's like, I know that the information is here that I need to build myself and to build my community, and I will take that from this experience, but I'm not here for the insistence of white supremacy to try to mold my mind in a way that is not meant for me, right? And so it really was so powerful to be in these worlds where there was such a push and pull of, I'm fighting for my identity as a Black woman, and I'm also so grateful for the worlds that were expanded before my eyes because of these educational opportunities. It's complicated, right?
Right.
But that's
it's really complicated because it becomes this thing of like not want, like, it's because I'm having a similar conversation when it comes to culinary school, and this idea around like what's valuable and what's not, like what tools do you need to be armed with to be able to go out and navigate effectively, just for your own sort of personal development or whatever, but also then to do work that recognizes the truth of the spaces you're about to go into, but just sort of a way, and I think something in what Clay and Colleen have created here, and certainly in what you guys do with People's Kitchen Collective, is almost about wrapping folks up in a way that does the emotional labor, or sort of protects folks in the on the spirit side, so that you sort of are able to go back out into these worlds that you have to occupy and have that root of connectivity, because it gets really frivolous really quickly in some of these spaces. And if you don't have those kinds of connections, the list. When you really do have community in really dope and important ways.
It's so true. Like, it's really required of us to be so specific about rolling deep with a constant support system, because it's from all directions all day long. And that's why this moment is so powerful, because this moment of reckoning is acknowledging that as we walk down the street, there are moments, whether it be street signs or contracts that we sign at work, or going in and seeing the ways that we interact with different professional entities. Every single part of those experiences has a basis in white supremacy that is destructive to our way of being in the world. And that's what people are waking up to right now in a way that hasn't been done in the past. So we need to grab this moment and say, yes, this is so critical to the way that we are in the world, that it is imperative that the way that we do our work, especially within the Black food community, has to be brought forth and uplifted as a standard, And
that's right.
These spaces can be reimagined so that we are centered in them, and we are not only supported but restored by them.
That word, that restoration, that's the part, because I think so much of what you hear especially among Black folks, and certainly among sort of this awakening that other people of color are sort of seeing, this is a random side note, but something about the way we were talking the other day, but certainly in just hearing you talk over the years, it always feels like when, I don't know how to say it probably, but it just feels like when Black people get free, we get everybody free.
Yeah.
So it's this thing of like being able to center ourselves in a way that allows for like the fullness of our humanity to be primary in our thoughts, and have that not be a dismissal of other people's struggles. Because I think sometimes one of the things I wanted to talk, it's random thought, but it's one of the things I wanted to talk to you was about this work of liberation feels so huge, right? And I think sometimes it feels intimidating when you don't necessarily have that backup. The backup you talked about is the perfect way to put it. And it feels sometimes when you, like, watching you guys as collective, it feels like you have sort of created the framework that other people could use to maybe think about how to create that sort of backup that doesn't necessarily require Black folks to do all the labor to ask other people of color to come to the table with their trauma stories, whatever, and sort of, I don't know, just kind of create a broader, more thoughtful community that takes some of the pressure off. But I wonder in that, like, what does that look like in terms of, I mean, you can say just you need to read everything. You need to be, but not everybody has the benefit of being entrenched in places or in spaces that allow them the sort of breath to the physical breath and also like sort of the mental breath to be able to figure out where they fit in that sort of puzzle, where in the struggle they can be effective. Because I'm wondering if part of your work is ever thinking about how to bring people to the table, even Black folks to the table in a way that makes them feel empowered and not sort of I don't know, less equipped than anybody else. I feel like everybody has something to contribute, right?
It's so true. We all have our different roles. And there's such a big part of this moment that's also really about focusing on each of our skill sets, each of our talents, and acknowledging all the ways that we can show up with the strength of that individual talent and that it contributes to a collective whole that can become unassailable by the social evils of racism and sexism and classism. We need each other to really weave together in a strong embrace in order to maintain the liberties that we have and claim the freedoms that we are owed. So specifically to your question of setting the table, there is a very specific way, and I'm going to speak specifically to People's Kitchen Collective in this moment. We create a space, we co-create a space with collaborators, with the guests, with ancestors. And that's based in relationships that are filled with trust. And we all know that takes time, but the movement only at the speed of trust, as we all know. So in how we cultivate our space, we invite people in a very specific way. We give people permission to even show up in a very specific way so that they know that there are healthy boundaries around this space that centers the lived experience of Black and Brown folks. So that feels like a really big piece of how we can share an experience that is restorative and safer and braver, is by setting the expectations really clearly. And then it really is all of the aesthetic wonder of creating an event. You know, like this bogolan behind me, this wax cloth that I'm wearing, these visible cues to our source, they absolutely, in my case, and what I've heard from other people, they calm my nervous system. I'm not surrounded by white walls and the allegory of whiteness that goes with them. I am completely surrounded by my community, whether it be figurative or literal. And that is such a calming thing, to be able to then feel empowered to take the risk to step into your own personal story, right? Because at these tables, we are inviting people to be very vulnerable, to be courageous in the stories that they share on any particular issue that we're addressing at our meals. It can be, you know, such a broad spectrum, but it's all in this idea of there are folks, whether family or other ancestors, that have dealt with these issues before. We're learning from them. We have contemporaries that are in the same issue across sectors and across cultural identities, and we're talking together about these issues, and we're building the resources to continue in this struggle, and also very specifically in this tradition of celebration. Because we're here.
That's right.
We're here. We're survivors. And that's at the heart of being at a table with us. You're invited to be in that place. of being such a phenomenal future ancestor.
Even the language you use is really important. I think it's so interesting that you talk about you use the word collaborator a lot, and
Mm,
it's such an interesting way of thinking about, because it to your point, it changes the posture people come to the table with, right? If you are this sense sometimes that when you're sharing your story or sort of sharing your, I feel like the the overarching sort of ethos of People's Kitchen Collective sort of sets a very particular tone. And then when it would be really easy and really typical of other types of spaces, where your contribution is this sort of accessory, and that we're collaborated, it immediately changes that posture, right? It's not a sort of auxiliary sort of thing. It's you are in community with, in concert with, in collaboration with. And so you sort of have the responsibility then to come to the table fully formed and sort of thoughtful. And I think it's a really particularly beautiful way of signaling. Because I think sometimes
yeah.
we get so confused. We make things maybe more complicated than they need to be, when we legit just have to set the tone very clearly for folks. And they either show up or don't. But if they do, typically they show up way
Beautiful.
more open than they would have if they were clear.
It's,
Yeah. I
I
don't
like,
know. I feel like we're doing good on time. I want to, because I feel like I feel like most people have to be aware of you guys, but if they aren't aware of what People's Kitchen Collective is, and I mean, I haven't gotten an opportunity to be
mm,
at a table, but I mean, just seeing the video and just hearing
mm,
people's stories is such a, I got getting chills right now because it feels so singular. So I wonder if you could just talk about a sort of not typical, but sort of a iconic,
mm.
like emblematic People's Kitchen Collective event, like what the feeling is, what the thought process is, the curation, that kind of thing.
Right. And it really is a valuable sort of process to go through with you, because we're in a place where we are not able to gather in the ways that we have. And so
Because that was going to be my next
exactly,
question. Yeah.
we're in that space of really being nostalgic about the fact that we could gather 500 people together at one long table down 2 city blocks and serve one
Mm,
another family style, and be at the intersection where little Bobby Hutton was shot. And to know that on that same block, the neighbors now are taking care of each other through gentrification. And it's powerful to know that, that event we specifically held right on the weekend of Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X's birthday. And it's empowering for us to know that spaces can be created with so much intention that when people step into them, they know that they're entering into this intersection of food and art and social justice with a real eye toward creating our legacy together. And so inviting people into a space is something that feels it feels like such an honor, because we do so much work ahead of time. We have so many volunteers, and we are, setting the space to be something that is, like you said, co-created. But the example that I'm talking about is the streets meal that we had in May of 2018. We have as our standard um, to the calling to serve large groups of people, to be at that place of calling together community in that way. And that's why I love Justice Kitchen as my other project, because it's really a one-on-one experience and tending to that kind of
right.
place. But, we are creating a program for each of our meals, our community meals. And that program really looks to the historical relevance of this moment, whatever theme it may be, which is, it could be kitchen remedies. It could be discussing how the executive orders for the Muslim ban and Japanese internment are so similar and so tragic in their similarity. It can be about
Right.
talking about farming and foodways and the feeling of being able to claim land and flavors from that land. And so it's so topical each time, but we want to make sure that we're giving people something to hold that is a gift to them, that talks about what is the historical relevance of this theme that we're discussing, and you know, being able to create this moment for folks to see themselves in that information or in that program. We do a
Absolutely.
playlist for every meal that also is on the theme. We create a menu that is speaking directly to how we can engage the conversation based on the food that's at the table and the stories and the memories and the flavors that it represents. We always serve family style because we want those folks at any, you know, there's a six top setting at any, you know, in the food community. We know that six
That's
top
right.
setting, right? And those six people are actively told to take care of one another and to
That's right.
serve others before you serve yourself. Make sure everybody in that six top is taken care of. And it really is
That's
a
right.
beautiful, again, setting of expectation and a moment for people to really understand what is possible during these couple of hours that we're together, to exchange
Mm,
service with one another and to exchange care for one another. And, you know, we have poet
absolutely.
theologian that blesses our food, as well as my family tradition of singing a song at the beginning of every meal that also shifts the space into such a place of receptivity and of loving kindness, quite frankly. It really gets to the heart of what it
Right.
is to have the components that are necessary to feel like you're in beloved community. And it is really important for us to bring other voices in besides our own because we don't want to have that cult of personality thing happen. Movements are about the people,
Yeah.
not the figureheads, you know? And so
Ooh.
it's really important to take that step of decentering ourselves, even so that the words that are being
God.
expressed have so many more perspectives than our own, and therefore more people can see themselves. Because at the end of each meal, there is a call to action. There is this moment where we say, this evening has led up to us being able to step out into the world and let what happened here be in the world with us.
Ooh.
And we have to be able to really
Yeah.
leverage that moment for social justice change to
Yeah.
actually occur. We want to be at the table with you, but we want to be in the streets with you even more.
That's right. That's right. Oh my gosh, yes. So many things in that bring to like bring is like so important. Some of we use words like self care. We use words like sort of emotional trauma. We use these words sort of to name the sort of push pull that we feel emotionally, intellectually with how we have to go out and engage the world. And the exhaustion in that, in a lot of ways, is that it is a perpetual thing that only centers our experience. And I think that idea about decentering is so interesting because I think that it almost sort of releases the pressure valve in our own experience, our own trauma, in a way that asks you to, I mean, that posture of doing for other people, that posture of considering other points of view, hearing someone else's story, feeling that sort of signifying in someone else's story that may not be exactly like yours, but signals to the same trauma, it's so interesting because it just, I feel like that it just like that's the only example I could think of, but just like that pressure valve, all of a sudden your shoulders sort of like, you know, sort of go down a little, and you sort of feel less, I don't know, less helpless.
Mm.
Because I think sometimes the feeling of community, even in trauma, is important, right? The sort of feeling seen or heard, but then also seeing and hearing other people is a really interesting posture. One of the
It's
videos
cathartic for sure.
I've been captivated by, yeah, yeah, was the dinner you guys did around Japanese internment, and that like the Flora, I forget how you pronounce her
Oh, yeah,
last name, but
so
the
wonderful. One of the last families to have a rose business, a floral business in the Richmond area. Yeah.
because something about the way she like just I mean again like it was only a video and sort of watching the clips of her experience that dinner and talk a little bit at the end, but just her even feeling seen and heard, having her story amplified in that way had to have. I mean, you're point about changing people from the moment they hit the door and then empowering them to go out into the world. Like I don't know, something that I think we have a romantic idea about history sometimes and don't really think about the folks who experience that history in a way that centers them as opposed to our imagination onto their stories. So it's really interesting, I think, the way you center her and her work, and even the way her flowers were incorporated into the dinner, and just all those elements just feel so beautifully intentional. And I see Crystal Mack in the comments. I don't know if you know Crystal. Like she's Baltimore based, and the work she's doing as well is like if you move outside of the sort of particularity of the culinary space that has particular expectations, and you center art and thought and I don't know, just community and like all those spiritual elements that are the things that really feed you. All of a sudden, you transform spaces just by being there, just by thinking.
That's it.
Oh, it's so good, Jocelyn. I'm so excited about the fact that you exist in the world.
So good.
Because then also,
I wanted to just say this idea of, and I'll go back to it over and over, of relationships. And I'm so grateful we have media to capture a bit of that, because all these stories, all these meals, these community meals that we've hosted, it starts with relationships. It starts with so many things that are never seen, as far as the months ahead of time, if not years, where we're just talking, we're just visiting, we're just being really humble as we learn. And we are in those moments building trust, because our events aren't anything without the trust of our collaborators, that we'll be honoring them and their stories in a way that feels like it's an integrity and authentic. And so that's what's felt on the day of the event, is all of the work that goes into this importance of building relationships that are not temporary, they're lifelong. And that's the beautiful thing too. Like there's, just this beautiful experience of these relationships that keep going and they keep building. We keep learning more, and it continues to weave into all the events that we have after that. Just because that's how humans work, that's how humanity works. Once we're in each other's lives,
that's right.
Once we choose each other, the power of that connection informs all that we do, if we let it. If we let it. And when I say if we let it, I'm saying that with a lot of humility as well, because when you're talking about the trauma of lived experience, in especially this, the Black community, letting something in that way can be a harming experience. And so creating a space where it feels safer to let that in, to let in that connection, oh, that is such a gateway to so much individual and interpersonal and society-wide shifts. And so that feels like a powerful thing to cultivate across all the food community, is more vulnerability, more courageous vulnerability as we're setting these tables to eat together. And I see that in all the folks that you have interviewed, that quality is present, all these pop-ups with so much attention to personal story, personal narrative. That's the heart of it, is I'm trusting you with my story. I'm trusting you with my life, my lived experience. And in return, I don't have the expectation in return, but I know that it's an invitation. I know that it is an open invitation for you to take the same risk, to let me in. And in that, we find our collective healing and our collective liberation, because we are so much stronger and so much more resourced. I then have all the skills that you have, not just my own. We're partnered, we're creating something together that, again, is unassailable to this experience that has historically not respected us. So it's all the things. I really do believe so much is possible within the food community. because of how we
Absolutely.
do it. It's almost
Yes.
like food is often secondary because the food is the gateway to the
Right.
relationship, you know? And
Yes.
the
Yes.
food is about, my grandma. The food is about this flavor that I have a memory of that healed me. Like the food is the gateway. And when we leverage it to such a positive end, ooh, it's limitless.
Right. That's right. That's absolutely right. So I guess I feel like there's something in, because that part I wanted to make sure we talked about that, the process, because it does feel like, because you're so intentional, there is sort of a, like, your dinners do become these sort of jewel boxes that don't exist like willy-nilly, right? Like, there's really particular intention. They are topical. They are very specific to the moment that they exist in. And so I'm wondering about what sort of COVID has done to your thought process, what the sort of civil awakening that folks have been having over the last sort of month or so. Attention sort of being paid more to, or thought around, really sort of dismantling systems that don't work for us. And the consciousness is sort of being awakening. I mean, part of it is that, the world stops and we aren't gathering the way we were pre, which was absolutely a thing. But I think that there's such a specificity to the function you guys serve, and if there's almost a necessity to sort of figure out um, what a healing space would look like, especially now. And so I'm sure you guys are thinking about it, but I'm just wondering what that might look like, if you are at all like close to sort of a a thought around when and what that would be, or when.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's so interesting, the timing of all of this, because at the beginning of the year, we have our annual People's Kitchen Collective retreat amongst the three co-founders. And it's
Hmm.
always, I'm so grateful for Sita and for Sakib, my two co-founders, because we really walk the walk when it comes to creating a vulnerable space for us to dream together, to vision together. And
Hmm.
it's so special. And one of the things that we really determined during that time is that we needed a sabbatical. So we are actually on sabbatical right now, as much as you can sabbatical during a revolution. And it really is
Right. Well, but
a,
yeah, I
a
can
time
see
for
that.
us. We intentionally took, because we're in the midst of writing a book together as well. And this is our
Okay.
moment for resourcing. This is our moment for our own version of healing justice, to be prepared for the new way we need to be present for community, to be the effective
Mhm.
for how the world is showing itself right now. And so we had that conversation in January, and it's holding true in this moment. So our public facing events are, the next one that's coming up is actually not until October. And that is the second weekend Life is Living Festival in West Oakland that we do the free breakfast program.
Mhm.
And so when we are putting
Okay.
our systems and our thoughts and our feelings to what that looks like, we definitely shifted to a meal distribution type of model so that we could keep all the communities safe and all the elders safe. But we'll be serving upwards of
Right.
500 to 800 people, at that event. And a lot of it will meal
Mm.
distribution, delivery. There will be some in person, but it's really very much how do we hold the space in respect to, what is needed by health, and also what is needed by, the folks that are holding the direct actions that are at the heart of subverting systemic racism. And so we're making that
Absolutely.
shift in that respect, but as a broader look, it's heartbreaking to know that we cannot gather 500 or even 100 people together inside, at, until 2021 at least, if not beyond,
At least.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so really looking at, I'm so grateful to see all these models that are coming up for what is it to create curate a space in a virtual setting. And I think I'm really excited to see how the MoFat event goes off. The rent party.
Yeah, it's gonna be
That is
dope.
really, I mean,
Yeah,
they've tended to so many details
yeah,
that we also tend
yes.
to, but in a virtual setting. And especially with that idea,
Mm-hmm.
and this is something that I do with my one-on-one sessions with Justice Kitchen, I already shifted to virtual so that I'm creating care packages for people that I send out before the session. So they can create a space in their
Yeah,
own home that reflects some of the sacredness that I offer in my own space during those sessions. So it feels like making those choices are really important. Not not continuing to innovate around what it
yeah,
means
yeah,
to hold space together, and what are those different relationships, what are those different aesthetics, what are the different co-creative moments that can still happen when we're not able to gather. And
yeah.
we're excited about where that's looking, and there are things that I can't talk about out loud yet, which I'm looking forward to
No,
talking about
absolutely,
out loud with
absolutely.
you, that are really exciting, but
That's
that's
right.
coming.
That's right. Well, because that was the two things in that. Like, there's something that you said earlier on about sort of being super, like, hyper intentional in the beginning. I feel like sometimes folks feel like the sort of paralyzing force of just starting. And so much of the work you do in terms of trying to build community or build platforms, or like whatever that thing is you want to do, a lot of times it feels very much like we discount the power of
Yeah.
foundation from the beginning, right? Like that, like being able to answer those yes no questions about does this serve you, does this fit your ethos really early on makes everything else in terms of growth much more manageable, right? Like if you there are opportunities that come along that may be dope and like bring eyes or whatever to the spaces you occupy, but they don't serve the original foundational ethos, then it's an easy yes and no. So it just I feel like that sense of like what pivot looks like, the folks, in my opinion, who have always had a really clear sense of why, a sense of foundation, are actually having not as hard a problem now in terms of
Yeah.
pivoting. Most ads, I mean, that I've been on the
Yeah.
advisory board for that for 3 years,
Exactly.
and every part of it has been about what do we really want this to look like? What is the spirit we're trying to create? And so the elements of that, absolutely. I mean, you even with you guys, like I just feel like to your point about like what consideration for everyone involved with
What
like
is
what
access for
what
everyone?
all you because y'all have it, you able to answer those questions a lot more effectively because you have a, a very clear
Mm-hmm.
foundation about what elements you have to have present and what you will and won't compromise. That's a huge part of it. But then I also think about like I'm thanking God that you said the book that you guys are working on a book because it just feels like I'm thinking about Leah Penniman and Sophie Farm's book. I mean, she talks about that book as like the manual she wanted to have
Yes.
because she couldn't have folks come to the space as
Mm-hmm.
much as she wanted. And the question I was asking
Mm-hmm.
you earlier was really just kind of about this sense that you guys have created this model that should be replicatable, right? It should be. It seems like to you all, it may seem simple in terms of like your why, but it just feels very much like a toolbox that people just need to have in their hands. Like I cannot wait for what this thing is going to be because I can imagine how beautiful and important it's going to be. Because my God, like
Oh, thank
what you all are creating
you.
is really it.
I mean, and that's the thing, that this book is really about legacy. It's really about the fact that we are here for a finite period of time, and and specifically, Sita and Sack would laugh at me all the time because my certainty of the staying power of People's Kitchen Collective, because I know that it's going to go on for generations, and that
That's
feeling
right.
needs somewhere to be held. And this book is one of those places, because People's Kitchen Collective has had many iterations. It's reframed itself several times over the last more than a decade that it's been in existence. And it's important to see, we're in a pivot right now, but there have been pivots and shifts all along that way that were relevant to movement work and to doing organizing through the mode of food. And so I really am, I'm really excited about providing this resource as well as this space of inspiration for folks to take on the mantle of collectively eating in order to find collective liberation.
That
Yeah.
part. Yes. Oh, so good. So good. Because even the sense that like you all, I swear to God, Jocelyn, when you are in alignment, when you are in the midst of your legit life's
In the
purpose,
flow.
the guy, whatever you believe in, yes, it makes room for all things. I mean, it's not always easy. All those things are true. Like it's not Pollyanna. It's not just weirdly and like dismissively optimistic. It's truth that when you just start from a place that is so clear, there's you don't. Yes, you're able to tough times are gonna come. But you're able to navigate them in ways that serve that initial, very particular
Foundation.
ethos. So good. It's like it's yes, yes, so good. Um, yeah, because even in I mean I wasn't really aware of Justice Kitchen, but it also makes sense too, right? Like there are things within the framework of People's Healing Collective that maybe don't fit perfectly or aren't as particular, right? Don't serve that overarching ethos. To be able to then do in this really other particular, very specific way, serve the spaces that you need as well. I think,
I
oh,
mean, and
so
that's
good.
what we're called on as human beings as well, is to know that in this container of multitudes that these lived experiences that we have contain, it's really important to know that we need to be served from many different directions in order to be whole. There's no such thing as a single dimensioned human being. And in order for really
Yeah.
get to the heart of social change and individual change and transformation, we have to be really, insightful and self-reflective and self-aware about what is required for our healing and for our ability to really be in a place that is anchored by truth and not just a made-up story, because so much of our lives is that.
That
So
part.
much of our lives are sloughing off what's not serving us because it's been the habit of our society to try and create a norm or a standard,
A
a
pre-narrative.
denominator that centers whiteness. I'm not here for that. I'm not here for that. I'm just not.
That's right. I'm wondering about Oakland. Like, do you feel that that place is
It's
sort of central to why your collective works, or is it? I mean, because I'm thinking about places like Detroit. I'm thinking about places like I don't know. I mean, Detroit, Oakland always kind of come to mind. But I mean, also like I'm from New York, so like I feel like there's a really particular space in the Bronx and Harlem and parts of Brooklyn that really do have a very particular spirit about them. But I'm wondering about Oakland as like the sort of as a kind of character or sort of a other collaborator in
it
your
is.
collective because it just feels like a very
It's one of
particularly
the
Oakland.
co-founders, as far as I'm concerned. Like,
Yeah,
there's something really
yeah,
special about the Bay Area, and it's about pre-existing relationships, of course, and connections. But more than that, it's again about the historical context. We are on a
yes,
foundation of so many activists and artists that have come before us that are still
yeah,
inspiriting this place, ensouling this
yeah,
space. And so it really feels important to, wherever you may be, whether it's Detroit or whether it's New York or whether it's Texas or whether it's the most unlikely of spots in the middle of the Midwest, there's going to be a story there. There's going to be soul
yeah.
there that has done the work before you. And it's important, and you know this as a Black culinary historian, that those stories be made aware of so that we can anchor into them, so that we know that we have a solid foundation and that people can see the truth of that as a place of, that they can come together around, right? And so it really does
Right.
feel like, the place absolutely matters. It really does. And but more than that, our our caretaking of that space and the community that's there and the historical relevance of it is essential to the process as well.
Hmm. I think like I'd still use the word stewardship because I think that's a really particular word that really does. I think it requires something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like this thought sometimes around a appreciation for history, or even in a lot of ways, I not reject, but I sort of hasten to even use the word historian because it just feels sometimes like a very passive word. It feels very much like
That's
stewardship
really
requires you
great.
to then
Thank you
protect.
for that. I love that reframe. I love
Oh,
that reframing. It feels really important because there's actually, we have a sister that's doing work with anti-racism right now and is trained as a historian, but she's like, don't get this twisted. I am in the world and I am active. This is living history.
right.
Okay? And that feels like a really
That's
important
the
framing for us to understand, again, what you were talking about, that foundation. It's not something that's static.
yeah.
It's ever evolving because we're getting more information and because we're adding to it with our own stories. I love that reframing. It's so
Yep.
dynamic.
um, we getting close to the hour. It's like I always feel like all our conversations like go on so beautifully, and I always feel like I'm missing. I don't want to stop, but I want to leave room if anybody has any questions. Because Jocelyn's so brilliant and has so many disciplines, so I'm sure there are things that you could intuit or incite if you had any questions. But I also encourage y'all to just connect.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we discount the like we use social media in this way that is valuable for knowing theoretically about people, but legit connecting with
Mm-hmm.
people. Like if you, I don't know. Again, like I don't know if you and or Crystal Law, but like I want y'all like y'all feel like the peas in a very particular pie. Like it just
And that,
there's something very dope about when you make these connections between
yeah,
people who so
and that's
clearly
the beauty of this
like
moment
should just
too,
be in.
because we are in a spot, and we were talking
Yeah.
about this. I was grateful to be able to interview you for an upcoming article, and during our conversation, we spoke to this idea that this pandemic has created a stillness and a quietness
Mm-hmm.
for us to really have the opportunity to step into relationship and connection in a way where a busy life doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some
Yep.
grace in the opportunity that this moment is giving us to really, uh, really enjoy one another, to really be able to say, you know
Yeah.
what, we are only a virtual, a button push away from one another, and we don't need to be
Mm-hmm.
in the world. We don't need to be in the world and thinking that that's a limitation. We are connected by just a moment's breath of effort, and we all know about each
Yep.
other. We all know about each other.
Yeah.
This
Yep.
is that moment
Yep.
where any
We watch each other. And
artificial
that's the part
boundary can
too.
come down in the service of the building that we need to do in order to maintain this social justice movement that is on fire with
Mhm.
possibility. We get to do that.
Yes. Yep. So I guess because we got about 5 minutes left, and I want to like I feel like you just feel I feel like you're so insightful in terms of where our attention should
Mm.
be and like what things you not so much. I mean, you care about everything, but like where your spirit is right now, and what things that you pay attention to that you maybe want folks to consider that they maybe haven't thought about or maybe don't see the importance in thinking about. Just kind of what's on your spirit now. What are you paying attention to? What should we be thinking about?
Oh, honey, such a good question. I am so grateful for that. And, it's part of my practice to, you were saying this term self-care. I often refer to it
Mm.
as healing justice, because there's
Mm.
something really
Mm.
important in knowing what we need spiritually, logistically, familial,
Yes.
connections. Really taking the moment of inventory of what we need in order to really get to the source of our healing. And that feels,
Mm.
what my offering right now is, one of my pandemic shifts is to offer free care packages to Black women. It's like 3 items,
Mm.
ingredients sourced from Africa and from traditional recipes from the South that really give people opportunity to sit with the power and purpose of where we're from in our present day identity and purpose, right? And I feel like food can do that, you know? When you are able to have, it's so funny. I was just making these, but this is like these ground ginger moringa leaves, uh, these moringa leaves that are from Ghana. You know, these ingredients, when they're in your hand and then when they transfer into your body, there's no mistake in the pathways that they take within your spiritual self and your physical self to create healing and to create justice in your own body. And so that's what we provide right now, is a real activation of agency around what we can do for ourselves when we identify what our needs are, and how food can really be a conduit for that kind of healing.
Yes, God. Yes. That I'm gonna sit with that for a long time. Like I feel like a couple weeks ago, Shakira Assembly talked about radical grace. And this I oh my God, this justice for yourself first is such a big deal. Like how often do we not like it becomes like super it just feels buzzworthy when we think about this idea of course you're supposed to take care of yourself, self-care first, but not really think about what that means and looks like just for you, not, you know, other people's expectation, if it's, you know, just this sort of list that people give you, and not really considering what any of that has any relevance for yourself.
Yeah.
Are you being just to yourself first?
Hey,
oh my goodness.
Hey, are you being just to yourself? Okay. Wow.
Jocelyn, this is so great. I'm so thankful for you. There's something about this archive that is like, it's so many conversations that I keep going back to. I'm sure this is going to be one that folks are going to revisit. Just, I don't know, where can folks reach you? What should they be paying? Like,
Where
you
can
know,
they add me?
what does people, may need? Yes, where can we add?
It really is the self-titles. It's at People's Kitchen Collective and at Justice Kitchen. Justice Kitchen is
That's right.
spelled Justus, based on the word of Huey P. Newton. I went looking for justice and I found just us. We have just us. It's still a FUBU world, you know, it really is. And so I really want us to count on one another for the things that we need, and to also know that we can find healing in the arms of our Black community.
That's right. That's right. That sounds, I mean, you're such a pro. You just, it's like exactly right way at the end. Like it's exactly right. Yeah, just thank you so much. This is beautiful. And
be here.
We'll be talking more in general, but I'm just so
don't even know. It's on.
That's you one of those folks. It's like you sort of, sometimes I think we get seduced by the separations of our space, and like just like physically being in a different place, whatever, and or sort of thinking about how brilliant someone is, admiring somebody, but not really thinking like, I don't want to bother this person. I'm like, but you know, these are your people. This is everybody. We are all collectively.
It's so true. And that falsehood, that narrative that we are separate, is also a side effect and symptom of white supremacy. It is absolutely an intentional strategy that keeps oppression in place. Done with it.
That's right.
Done with it.
Done. Absolutely. That's perfect. I love you. I appreciate you. And we about to get cut off, but we will definitely be in touch. And please, y'all, follow Justice Kitchen and People's Kitchen Collective, and keep current with all the dope things to come. Copy a copy of the book when it goes out into the world. But thank you so much.
Thank you, my dear. I appreciate you.
Yep, talk soon.